These names up because in today's video we speak with a Canadian who crossed the ocean from her home in Montreal in the reverse to Spain in search of her treasure. Today on the Canadian Expat, we go to the city of Teruel in Spain. I have the pleasure of welcoming Teresa Maria Julian. Teresa, welcome to the Canadian Expat. And specifically, I really want to know about where you're living, right? And it's Teruel, right? Teruel?
Teruel, yes. Teruel is a small city. It's actually the smallest capital in all of Spain. So it's often here. There's a phrase that is very well known across Spain called Teruel existe. Like, oh my God, Teruel exists, really? So Turolenses themselves don't necessarily like that phrase very much, but I'm here because my father is actually from here. So I actually moved back to the city 50 years after he left. So he's actually in Canada. He lives with my mom, my siblings, my nieces in Montreal. So we're from Montreal, Quebec. But he was here since he was about 8 years old. And then with a huge operation that was going on here in Spain, he ended up moving to Canada with my grandmother. My grandfather was already there for work, and he brought them over 2 years later. And he was raised there, so he grew up, he studied there, etc. Met my mother, who's Italian, and we were brought here from very, very young. So it was very important to my parents that we were kind of raised in our immigrant culture as well. So I ended up moving back here 7 years ago. So yeah.
And so what was the reason for moving back to Teruel?
It's a very complex answer, but I'll say it's a combination of medical reasons. So I was an elite soccer player for many, many years in and unfortunately, I suffered over 8 concussions throughout my career. And my last concussion left me very, very ill with PCS, post-concussion syndrome, and a very severe version of it that doctors, even in Pittsburgh, in one of the most famous, if you will, concussion clinics, couldn't tell me whether I was going to get better or not. So I almost couldn't walk for 5 months due to that last. And they had no idea. Their predictions were that within 6 months, I would either decrease completely and, fall off the face of the earth, or I would get better, one of the two things. And so at that point, I made a decision. As an athlete, you're taught, never give up, keep pushing, etc. So I pulled myself kind of out of that rut. My brother helped me rebuild my muscles. I taught myself how to move, how to walk, how to do things. I learned my triggers, all of these things, and I kind of overcame it. I managed to still graduate from university. And then I knew that I couldn't stay in Montreal. Unfortunately, stress is a major trigger for a lot of the things that happened to me since that concussion. So Montreal was just extremely stressful because I happen to be a very independent person, and having so many people on top of me trying to help was actually stressing me, which was not helping, if you will. And Canada in general, though I love the country so much, I'm a very proud Canadian, it's a very Americanized style of living. So it's a very stressful way of life, unfortunately, and it's just something that my body can handle. So I decided to leave, and I had just done the previous year a volunteer abroad in Costa Rica. And so I wanted to go back because I loved it. I loved the village I was in, people I lived with, everything. And I wanted to go back there. And I said, you know what, if this is what it is, then, let me be happy on a beach somewhere. But that stressed out my parents because considering my medical state at that time, they were worried about me being by myself out there and not knowing what's going on. So I said, fine, how about this? I'll start off in Spain. And because we have family here, I said, I'll go to Teruel, I'll live in Teruel that first year, get to know things, and then we'll see where life takes me afterwards. And that's how I decided to come to Teruel.
And you're clearly doing well. I understand you're expecting something? Somebody?
Yes, I am expecting the next generation of Canadian here. So I am expecting my first child with my partner, Raul Firujeda, who's pure Turolense, as we say. He's from here as well. And yeah, so we're very, very happy. Something I did not think was going to be possible. And I have an amazing job. I have everything that I've needed, and I've built these 7 years a life out here.
Fantastic. Now, I have personally never been to Spain, but of course, I've seen images of Teruel in particular. Beautiful architecture, a gorgeous city. Are you living in one of those incredible buildings?
If I showed you the building I live in right now, it is quite incredible. But no, I don't live in one of those in particular. I live in a very stereotyped Spanish villa, but this is something that Raul and I have worked towards, and we wanted our family to have a house and a bit of that Canadian feel, be able to run outside and play, etc. So ever since Raul had been coming to Canada, he got more and more into the house idea of things. And we saw this, and we've been building towards it these last couple of years. So we're actually going to buy it. So if there was a way for me to take you outside, I would show you I'd show you the house. But Teruel is known for its Moorish architecture in Mudéjar, combination of actually Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And when the three all live together, so it's really built from that history, and the architecture is UNESCO protected as well. It's beautiful. It really is a place you just walk around and you're like, I can't believe I live here.
Well, certainly the images that I've seen are just absolutely gorgeous. It's a beautiful area.
Yeah.
So one thing that we've started to do in these interviews is for the purpose of if somebody decides if they're researching about moving to Spain, in particular, in this case, Teruel, we've got 6 different items that we ask people to rate the area that they live in. Okay. So it's fairly simple and understandably, it's completely subjective. But here the items are. Between 1 and 10, what would you rate the cost of living in Teruel?
It's a tricky question. I would say Teruel, I'd give it about an 8. I wouldn't give it the full 10 just because I do find the cost of apartments, like to purchase, if you want to come here and purchase an apartment, I find it quite high for this city in particular. Like it's something I would have expected from Madrid or Valencia, etc. However, if you look at the cost of those same style apartments in Madrid, they're double. So technically Teruel is cheap, but it's expensive for what it is if you compare with Canada. However, the bars, the restaurants, food, the cost of living in general is quite good, if you will. So your salary, depending on what you do, and the cost of living here is a perfect ratio. So that's why I give it about an 8 in that case. It depends on if you want to buy or just kind of be renting out.
Perfect. Healthcare.
100%, I give it a 10. It's a 10 for healthcare in general. The fact that healthcare here is like in Canada, so it is free. It's free in the sense that it's pulled out of there. You don't pay anything when you go to the treatment of people, even if you're a foreigner in the hospitals, is very, very good. I've needed to go to the hospital numerous times over the last 7 years for my medical stuff, and the treatment has been absolutely spectacular. I think overall health care in Spain is very, very good.
Fantastic. Friendliness.
I'll give it a 9. A 9 or a 10.
Still very high. 9
or 10 if you speak Spanish. I'll give it 6 or 7 if you don't. Teruel is a place that is very local, very typical Spanish, right? And it's a place where everybody grew up together. Everybody knows everybody. It's like with my exchange students who come over from Canada, I always tell them, guys, if you misbehave, believe me, everybody knows you're my Canadians, which means I'll get a phone call within 2 minutes telling me, Teresa, your Canadians are running around, right? So everybody knows everybody in this city, which means it's a little bit hard sometimes to break into those groups. though people are very friendly. They're willing to help you, get set up. They're willing to tell you where the bank is, help you with all of that. So they're very friendly in that sense. But to make friends per se can be a little bit difficult in the beginning, especially if you don't speak Spanish. It takes a little bit to really pull them out of there. And then if you do speak Spanish, it's obviously it's a lot easier because you can relate with them a little bit more.
Right. Very good. Access back to Canada.
Spain in general has very good access. You have direct flights from Madrid, Barcelona, and Malaga. Actually, Malaga to Montreal has direct flights. Teruel is in the middle of nowhere, and part of our main political thing was that we're given very terrible support from the government in terms of transportation, etc. So access is easy. I'm usually home 3-4 times a year for work in particular, plus maybe one personal trip, but the rest is usually for work. So I've never had any issues whatsoever with
that. And the last question in terms of this rating, the service that you may receive from a Canadian consulate or embassy.
Tricky question again. I've only ever worked with the embassy in Madrid for business purposes as well as personal. I found at the business level, it was a little bit trickier to kind of work with them and deal with them. At a personal level, my experience has been good. I've heard kind of horror stories of people who have never been able to contact, et cetera. But my personal experience, for example, when I needed to renew my passport, or when I had questions now, for example, with my child, how do I get them their Canadian nationality, all of this, they've responded to me right away and have been very, very helpful with regards to that. So my experience has been a good one. However, I have heard, just like I think anywhere in the world, I have heard, some horror stories too.
So I'm curious about Teruel in terms of the Canadian expat community. I know there's a Facebook page for Canadians in Spain. Are you involved in that expat community at all?
I'm in that Facebook group, actually, in the Canadians in Spain, but there's very few here in Teruel. I'm known as the Canadian, so it's like that's my title, is the Canadian. So even as auxiliares, the language and cultural assistants come in every year, and sometimes there's a Canadian here or there. The schools will always tell them, "Oh, do you know Teresa, the Canadian?" Right? So I'm like the original Canadian of Teruel. So it's a lot of fun. And it is fun when I coincide. I started ballet this year to start exercise again, and it was just hilarious. One day, this girl next to me was answering the teacher, and she had an accent, and I knew right away she's not Spanish. So I asked her, in English, I said, "Where are you from?" And she's like, "Oh, you speak English?" I'm like, "Yeah." And she's like, "Oh, I'm Canadian." I was like, "No way, me too." And then she's like, and then I'm like, "Where are you from?" She's like, "Montreal." I'm like, "Oh my God, me too." And it was just coincidence because I rarely come across Canadians in Teruel. It's really, really neat to do that. And she's actually working in the hospital. She's a doctor.
So if an individual were to come to you and ask, what should I do to prepare to move to Teruel or to Spain in general, what sort of advice would you give?
I think it would depend a lot on the objectives of the person wanting to come to Spain. So if it's specifically for employment purposes, then my advice would be very different depending on where they want to go. So employment, it depends on what they want to do. It is very difficult. A lot of people talk about Spain's unemployment rate, but I have not had a single found my way into it, and I built kind of my branch within it and stuff like that, bit by bit. I know a lot of other people also working. We actually hire Canadians too. So we have a Canadian working with us from Malaga, and the one in Madrid. And so there are jobs. They automatically assume, like if you talk in the Canadians in Spain group, they're always telling people, "Oh, you're only going to get a job as an English teacher." And that might be the easiest way of getting here, starting off as an English teacher, but there is potential and there's room, and there's a lot of international companies and big things everywhere that can help. The thing is, if you don't speak Spanish, then you can't expect Spanish companies are going to hire you, of course. And especially Spaniards are very proud people. So even if you don't speak the language well, if you're trying, they respect that. Whereas if you automatically talk to them in English and expect them to speak to you in English, it's insulting because you came here, you chose to come live in their home. So I always tell people, I said, you have to show a sign of respect to the place that you're going. And that includes the language that's there. So even if you're here, at least make that effort and try and learn and show them that you're interested, right? So I think that's the big one, is the Spanish language is important for everything. Employment opportunities, again, depend 100% on what you do. And where you want to go. Obviously, the bigger cities would have more employment opportunities. So those are all things that people really need to think about if they want to come here to find a job. The easiest way to come over, honestly, is as a language and cultural assistant via the government. So that can keep you here for easily 3 or 4 years if you want. And it's an easy program to get through. It gives you a lot of flexibility. The pay is what it is, but I mean, for the hours you work, it's okay. It's enough to survive and travel and do all kinds of stuff. So if it's just to have that kind of gap year, people would have a lot of fun too. And then we tend to get a lot of Canadians who have retired, and so they want to move to Spain to enjoy their retirement. So what a lot of them do, though, is they tend to go to expat communities. So they'll go to Malaga or to the coast, Costa del Sol, or these kinds of places where they kind of just sit in the little community of retired people and never speak a word of Spanish in their life. So my recommendation is, I mean, maybe go near one of those areas, but don't dive into one of those communities and kind of just completely ignore the culture around you. Spain is amazing, and it has such a beautiful culture, history, background, and people are really, really amazing when you show them that you're interested in where they come from. So if you're coming to Spain, dive in, like head first, dive in. You'll pick things up super quickly, but it's a sign of respect to where you're choosing to live as well. And I think here that's really, really important.
That's great advice, regardless of where you're moving in the world, right? The respect is everything. And I think you'll find that most people around the world are very responsive to people who show respect in terms of language, in terms of trying different foods, in terms of getting involved in the community, those sort of things. It's all about respect. Fantastic. Is there anything else that you might want to add?
Come hi, Spain.
Okay. That's awesome.
It's an incredible place. It's funny because it's so small, right? Spain fits into Quebec 5 times, Canada 20 times in terms of territory. So it's such a small place, and yet every part of it is different. So you go to Andalusia and it's radically different from the north, which is radically different from places that are more semi-arid, desert, central. You go to the coast, and the experience is different everywhere you go, because Spain has so much rich and incredible history that it was built on this, right? So it's such a fun place to explore. And Canadians, I find, don't know much about Spain except for Barcelona or Madrid. And there's so much more to it than that I think they would enjoy a lot more. So that's why I bring my kids to, Teruel, Zaragoza, and then they go and explore those other big cities. But to live in really, really is diving into the culture 100%, and it's incredible. And as a Canadian, I welcome all Canadians to come, and I always tell them in the group or even people like that, I say, if ever somebody wants to come by Teruel, feel free, come, just message me, let me know. On top of it, we have an Airbnb here too, which is a lot of fun. We get people from all over that come here, but I'm always happy to show people around Teruel, especially. Special place.
That's awesome. Teresa, thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Oh, of course. And thank you for letting me fill you in a little bit on all of this.
And thank you very much for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so. Until next time.